Started. My name is Derek Strain, and I'm the chapter chair of the Chicago chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, or AILA. AILA is a National Association of Immigration Lawyers. Some of the goals of AILA are to promote justice and to advocate for fair and reasonable immigration law and policy. And that's really the reason we're involved in this press conference today. I want to thank our co-sponsors, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights and the National Immigrant Justice Center for agreeing to co-sponsor this event with us. I also want to thank the people that worked hard to organize this press conference, Roy Berg, Nancy Weiser, Tristan Gunn, and Ann Peters, and Bob White, and all the others that were involved, Shirley Sajati. I want to thank our speakers who are from AILA, Shirley, Bob, and Roy especially, and I really want to especially thank those individuals who've come in who aren't immigration lawyers, who've come here to share their experiences and talk to us about what they've experienced with the immigration system. Of course, to begin the conference, I felt like I have to say something about the passing of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was a great leader in the struggle for human rights and human dignity in South Africa and around the world. I think it's very fitting that we should draw inspiration from him for our own work for these same causes. And I think the topic of our press conference today is directly related to the struggle for human rights and human dignity. Of course, we all believe that all people are entitled to these things. We're here today to discuss the need for immigration reform in this country. We believe that it's unacceptable for 11 million people to be forced to live in the shadows. We believe that that in these difficult economic times, it makes no sense for our own government to make it even more difficult for U.S. employers to hire and retain qualified workers in the country. And finally, we believe that people caught in the immigration system should be treated humanely and with decency, and that they should not be separated from their families for long periods of time during what's supposedly a mere administrative process. For these and other reasons, we believe that the time for immigration reform is right now. Our three panels today are going to cover various aspects of the need for immigration reform, including legislation, talking about the prospects for action and reform this year or in the near future. We'll talk about hardships people have faced in the family context. In the employment context, we have a panel that's going to discuss the need for immigration reform and talk about how employers and workers have been impacted by the current immigration laws. And then in the due process context, a panel is going to discuss the need for reform to ensure basic due process protections for people in the system.
Thanks so much, Derek. And I do want to make sure to thank the AILA local leadership who has been so supportive in putting this event together. As Derek said, it is very important to get the word out. There's so many people out there who don't understand why there's such a need for immigration reform. And we're trying to get the facts out so more people understand the need. We're expecting a video from Congressman Foster later on. If that comes in, we'll show that. He's just going to express his support for immigration reform and give some information about that. And Congresswoman Duckworth released a statement that she was not able to be here today. But her statement was Congress must pass comprehensive immigration reform that is practical, fair, and humane. We need a long-term plan that will secure our borders, include a responsible path to citizenship for 11 million undocumented individuals, and reunite families. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office determined that comprehensive immigration reform will reduce our national debt by $1 trillion over 20 years and I know that it will be a significant boost for our economy. The Senate has already passed comprehensive immigration reform, and it's time that Speaker Boehner bring immigration reform to a vote. So we're hoping through more events like this, the information about the necessity for immigration reform will get out there. With that said, I'd like to introduce the first panel. The discussion leader on the first panel is Shirley Sajati.
Thanks so much to the Media Committee and AILA for putting on this very important event. We cannot stop, no matter what you hear in the news, we can't stop fighting for this because we've never come so far as we have now. My name is Shirley, and I am honored to be joined today by Maria Torres and Reina Franco. They'll, in a little bit, after I talk for a little bit, they'll be giving their stories on how they personally could be impacted positively by immigration reform. And their stories are incredible for different reasons. And there's millions of people like Maria and Reina too. So I think that's what everybody needs to keep in mind. Why do we need immigration reform? I'm going to briefly talk about the current legalization provisions in the Senate reform proposal, and also the current state of play in Congress right now on what's going on with the next step. So as many of you know, the Senate passed a comprehensive immigration bill in June of this year. In my opinion, it was a balancing of, pleasing everybody. There's some border security provisions, there's legalization provisions for 11 million undocumented individuals in the United States. There's provisions, employment-based provisions, current to restructure our current employment-based immigration system, in addition to looking towards the future. It is politics at its best. Everyone got together, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats got together and put something together that everybody could agree upon. It was really a historic moment, in my opinion, for politics. And then that stopped. We got to the House, and they don't want to do it that way. They don't want to do comprehensive. They want to do a piecemeal approach. So, and I'll get to more of that in a little bit. The Senate bill, basically how it works on the legalization, and Bob White later in the next panel will talk more about the employment-based provisions. You have to have been here since the end of 2011. You have to show that you have not been convicted of a felony or 3 misdemeanors, traffic violations excluded. You have to demonstrate that you've never unlawfully voted in the United States. And you have to maintain continuous physical presence in the United States since 2011 as well. If you qualify under those provisions, and let me state, this is a lot more like deferred action. The program that the president approved about a 1.5 years ago, granting work authorization, travel authorization to certain immigrant youth. It's much more similar to that than it is to the amnesty back in 1986 is when I started in immigration. That required 5 years, it required a lot more. This was really, in my opinion, a gift. It was very nice. I was surprised at the 2011 date. I was surprised at all the things that were waived. Fraud, deportations, not leaving after a voluntary departure, all of those things are forgiven because they really want to start a clean slate. So it is an amazing piece of legislation or proposed legislation, but we haven't gotten farther than that. If you qualify, you get something called provisional permanent resident status. Okay, and the difference is that, and this is probably the downside to this, you have to wait. You don't, all the time you're in this provisional resident status, you are not counting any time towards citizenship. Okay, so in 10 years, however, if the government completes certain obligations, like certain border security enhancements, and they have to prove that they've done it, then 3 years later you can apply for citizenship. Now, you get all kind of the meat of being a resident, which is the travel authorization, work authorization, and the freedom to be the freedom of being deported from the United States. But you don't get that time it's not like being a permanent resident. Like if you get your green card today, it's not the same thing as a provisional provisional status. So that's the other side of it, but this is all about negotiation, this is all about compromise. Other good things in this bill, there's a mechanism inside this bill that we have lines right now in certain categories, for example, married children of U.S. citizens, okay, or older, 21-year or older children of U.S. citizens. They're in lines that are 30 years long, okay? There's mechanism, because there was all this discussion about how can you give resident status to people that have not tried to follow the rules. You can't let them jump the line. Well, the lines are so long, so there's mechanisms inside the reform bill that basically say we're going to get those people their resident status before the other people get their resident status after the provisional status. So you could theoretically have a person who's in a line, undocumented here, in a line, get the provisional status, and then also pursue their permanent resident status through the line that they've already qualified for. So that's kind of a nice thing. All that would have to be worked out later. The details, who knows? And we can't guarantee that if the House does pass something that would be anything similar to this. But the Senate bill is really, really nice with respect to the 11 million people in the United States. There's all kinds of other things in this bill. There's that I'm not going to get into. There's waivers that didn't exist. There's standards of waivers that are reduced for extreme hardship in a lot of cases. It's hardship now. It's not extreme hardship. It's a really, really nice bill. Like I said, the downside is relying on the government in 10 years to get some things done. But I think for the majority of people, getting that work permit and the resident status, whether or not it's provisional, and the travel authorization really means a lot to these people. So another thing, going back to the deferred action, last summer, President Obama prioritized enforcement of immigration and determined that a certain group of people are not dangerous to the United States and granted them something called deferred action, and that people who came to the United States under 15, went to school in the United States, or graduated from high school, or have their GED or registered for a GED, have lived in the United States since 2007, and same like the reform bill, not convicted of a felony or 3 misdemeanors. So far, approximately 500,000 people have applied and been approved for that program. Under the reform bill, if you have that status, and one of our speakers here today, Maria, does, if you have that status, you are assumed to be eligible for this program, and you would be on an expedited path to approval. So that's another very nice thing inside this bill. Many people have heard of the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act is incorporated into the reform bill as well. That's separate from deferred action, that's different, but a lot of the people that got deferred action are considered dreamers. It's not technically correct all the time, but it's very similar to that. So that's kind of the general background of the reform bill. Right now, what's going on in Congress, like I said, the Senate passed. They were done in June. The House, unfortunately, has decided not to take a comprehensive approach. They would rather take a piecemeal approach. So they've approved a handful of bills, an agricultural bill, an employment-based bill, border security, of course, bill. And if any of those bills would get voted on and approved, they could go up to a conference committee where we could just hash out both. The Senate bill would come up, and then the House bill would come up, and then we could determine a final bill. But unfortunately, because of politics, the Speaker of the House has not allowed any of these bills to go to a full vote on the House floor because he has this rule, and it's like termed the Hastert rule. It's not an official rule, but it's a Hastert rule that says I am not going to allow anything to a full vote unless the majority of my party agrees to it. And that's what's going on right now. It hasn't gone anywhere. There's been lots of other proposals in the House that haven't gone anywhere. They haven't even gotten out of committee. There's been nothing addressing the legalization of 11 million people in the United States. Recently, there's only one more week. The House is in session for one more week, next week. And so as much as I want to remain optimistic, and I'm going to remain optimistic, but this week, we highly doubt that by the end of the year anything's going to happen. But that doesn't mean next year something can't happen, despite the fact that it's an election year. Recently, and this is, in my opinion, a game changer, Speaker Boehner has hired an ex-McCain aide. Her name is, I have it. What's her name? Talent? Rebecca Talent, thank you very much. Okay, so yes, she used to work for McCain. She was in charge of spearheading McCain's efforts for comprehensive immigration reform under George W. Bush. After that, she went to work for a group called the Bipartisan Policy Center, where she brought people together from both sides to propose policy to change immigration, for immigration reform, basically. So I don't know, why Boehner would hire someone like that if he had no intention of bringing something and getting something passed next year is beyond me. So I actually believe that a hiring of this woman is definitely a game changer and that he's thinking of doing something. Not whether it will pass, but when it will pass. Now, of course, the problems we have, next year is an election year. So nobody wants to talk about anything really controversial during election year, immigration being one of those things. However, we do have a few opportunities. We have, right after the primary challenges have been filed, we have that opportunity. We have the opportunity after the primaries are over. But it's not like we have to do it at that time. We have to always, constantly do it. Many people have heard of the fasters that have been fasting, since before Thanksgiving in support of comprehensive immigration reform. A lot of congressional members have gone and supported them, joined them. Our organization, AILA, is doing it on this Tuesday. They're joining the fasters this Tuesday. It's gotten a lot of national attention. The polling, right now, the polling in support of immigration reform with the path to citizenship has never been so high. It's 75%. We have never been in this situation. This year was the first year that the pro-immigration activists have really gained the momentum. More in the past, the many years that I've been doing this, it's just been so frustrating because the anti-immigration lobby, whatever you want to call them, have always had more money, power, organization, and it's totally different now. We have the momentum. We just have to get the House to act, okay? And the only way we're going to do it is to keep pressure on them. Unfortunately, what's going on is that many of the congressional members who are critical in this and are holding this up are in districts where they have no danger of losing their seat. So many groups have ended up targeting the ones that do. And as far as I know now, there's like 9 of them, several of which have joined on to a Democratic proposed bill in the House, which is most likely not going anywhere. But what's good about it is that it provides impetus for media coverage that these people are not supportive of immigration reform. You're not, joining on this bill, and already I think 3 or 4 Republicans have joined. You don't support immigration reform, and then it gets back to their constituents. So that's really the challenge, getting people to understand that if they don't support this, they're going to lose their seats at the next election.
Once again, thank you for letting me be here with you guys and tell my story. My name is Reina Franco. I'm a U.S. citizen. In 2001, when I turned 21, we decided to put a petition for my parents because I was able to, and my mom was able to get her status as a legal permanent resident. But however, my dad couldn't really get his resident because he had a peer deportation in 1970 that wouldn't allow him to get his permanent resident card. He's been here more than 30 years. He's been paying taxes, and he's been working for all this time. And he has a wife who's a legal permanent resident. He has 2 U.S. citizen kids and 1 DACA kid too, and 8 grandkids. So now that he just turned 61, we kind of he's thinking to I'm sorry.
No. You're doing great.
We're now that he's 61, he's going to be ready to retire, but he will not be able to get any of those benefits because his status. So that's why we think if this Senate bill passed, he will be able to get his green card because it will waive that deportation that he had in 1970. And all his family is here, and he loves this country. And I think this is the only home that he has. So we're just asking for this reform to pass because we want him to be out of the shadow. And the other thing is that when his dad and his mom passed away, he couldn't really go for the funeral or anything. Until now, I can see they still affect him in one another way on that. But yeah, thank you.
Afternoon. Can everyone hear me back there? Okay. Cool. All right. So my name is Maria Torres, and I came to the United States when I was 15. I'm originally from Ciudad Juarez, in the border with El Paso, Texas. So I know I see some faces when I mention Ciudad Juarez. Some of you frown because, well, if you know the story and have heard the news and stuff about Ciudad Juarez, it's not a very happy place to live. My parents brought me to the United States mainly for me to be able to get an education, and I do not regret it, and I do not blame my parents. And even though we came as undocumented, I am thankful that they did. I was very blessed to be able to connect with many people who believed in me, who saw potential in me and supported me to go through college. As you may know, Illinois does offer in-state tuition for undocumented students. However, we are not able to apply for any type of financial aid. So through the different connections and support that I have received throughout my academic career, I was blessed to have scholarships that allowed me to go to college and graduated from NIU this past December. Ever since 2006, when I was in high school, I have been somehow involved in pushing and advocating for comprehensive immigration reform, mainly because I see the damage that it has done to many families, and because I see the trauma, the pain, and the continuous struggle that families with either members who are in mixed status families or families whose all members are undocumented see and face on a daily basis. I am undocumented, like Shirley mentioned. I was granted deferred action in January, and I cannot express how much that made a difference in my life. Like I mentioned, there were people who believed in me, people who supported me, who were able to give me advice on how to go through college and graduate. Coming from a minority low-income family was difficult to go through college. But then being undocumented and not having a lot of those resources was an additional burden to that journey. I think I was not looking forward to graduating. I wanted to stay in school forever and ever because it was a safe space. Even though I struggled to pay for school, I knew that the moment I graduated, it didn't make a difference because although I had a bachelor's degree, I would not be able to work because I didn't have a social security number. So when I had been scheduled to graduate in December, and last year I remember what I was doing exactly on June 15 when President Obama made the announcement. I had calls from people telling me there's going to be a press conference, there's something about Dreamers, do you know what's going on? And I remember reading Jan Napolitano's memo before the actual press conference, and when I actually heard him speak, I was in shock. I went to one of my coworkers and I just started crying. You might think that I was really happy, and I was to a certain degree because this meant a lot to me and to my parents. But at the same time, I thought it was very unfair because my parents work a lot harder than I do because my parents brought me here. My parents deserve more than to be second-class citizens. If it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't be here. And I know this story repeats itself throughout my community with many, many families. And I'm preaching to the choir. I know that you know this, and I know that you live it on a daily basis. But I think that sometimes we lose track and we lose sense of what we're fighting for. After deferred action, I was able to, I received a work permit and I was able to apply for a social security number and then get a driver's license. I had been pulled over before DACA and got arrested, having no criminal record, and got my car impounded. And then I also had to go to court. I had no money. I was going to school, and my mom works making minimum wage. We did not have money to pay for all those expenses. After DACA recently, I got pulled over again. Now I have a driver's license. The police officer only gave me a notice, and then I was let go. My parents, if they get pulled over tomorrow, they're going to get arrested. They're going to have to pay over $1,000 in fines if they miss a stop sign. Now, I understand that life is not fair, and I am not asking for something that I don't feel that is fair and that we have worked for already. But for the 10 years that we have living in the United States, my parents have been paying taxes, they have volunteered, and they raise a daughter that works for her community and who is constantly involved to pursue the rights of others. And to me, that is being American. And if my parents don't have the right to be here in the United States and have access to the basic rights that every other person and every citizen of the United States does, then the United States has failed us. Our legislatures have failed us. As a community organizer, I see that we have the need to continue to be involved in our communities and to go out there and work along with the people who are organizing in the churches and the community centers and throughout our neighborhoods. But we also need people like you who have the access to legislators, who have access through the coffee shop where you might be able to bump in with Speaker Boehner or with Senator Durbin and tell them that we need comprehensive immigration reform, because that changes our lives. I know you know this, but I urge you to be more involved than you already are, because at the grassroots level, we are fighting every day very hard to pass this because it matters to us. But you are our allies, and we need that. It is in your hands and within your power to push your friends, especially those people who are on the fence, who are not willing to make that commitment, to urge their legislators to push for immigration reform. Something that will allow the dozens of families in your neighborhood who might be affected by this, and will also help the more than 11 million people who are currently in the United States without proper documentation to live and work. Thank you very much.
Our next panel is sort of the hidden side of why we need immigration reform. The anti-immigrant activists tend to, their advertising or their publicity always shows undocumented people climbing over the fence, and that's what I think most Americans think of when they think of immigration. When I tell people that I'm an immigration attorney and they say, oh, well, you must speak Spanish, and I say, well, no, I don't. My clients are professionals and they speak English. And so Bob does that side of the immigration law. He's been an immigration attorney for over 20 years. He was started out as immigration assistant to the former U.S. Senator Alan Dixon, and he's now a principal, let me get sure the name of your firm right, Masuda, Funai, Eifert and Mitchell in Schaumburg. And he is an expert on business immigration issues. He's also co-advocacy chair of our local committee, unless Shirley just replaced him with her panelists. But for now, he's still there. Bob's panel are both my clients. Kevin McAnally is COO of IT startup Fan Fueled, and had hired an H-1B employee, and he's going to discuss that experience. He's also a corporate attorney to other IT startups, and is maybe coming across some of these issues in that capacity. Nan Zhu is also my client. Nan started out as a student in the United States, excelled in school, and was hired for a trading firm after he graduated, was an H-1B employee, still is an H-1B employee, and is waiting and waiting and waiting for permanent residence. And Bob is going to explain why Nan is waiting so many years, and Nan is going to tell how that is affecting him and his family.
Thanks, Nancy. So, as Nancy was saying, we're going to be talking about the business side of comprehensive immigration reform. Shirley gave you an overview of what's happening both in the Senate and what's not happening in the House. From a business perspective, as Shirley was saying, the Senate bill passed on June 27th. The day before, a bill was voted out of committee in the House called the Skills Act, which contained many favorable business provisions. So there's actually two components that we're going to be talking about today. The H-1B visa and then the green card process based on employment. So for the H-1B status, that's the primary work vehicle for non-domestic people in the United States. And the whole program is just fraught with issues. But probably the biggest issue is that there's an artificial cap on the number of H-1Bs that can be issued each year. And Bill Gates has testified on Capitol Hill numerous times about how this artificial cap is hindering, impeding our country's competitiveness. And actually, as a matter of fact, Microsoft opened a technology center right across the border in Canada because of all the issues that were being caused by the H-1B quota. And a lot of US workers were transferred to Canada. So really the H-1B issues, the cap, creates just a huge problem for employers, especially in the technology area, which Kevin's going to be talking about. Just to let you know what the cap is, there's a cap for the regular H-1B quota that we call it. It's 65,000, and then there's an extra 20,000 set aside for U.S. master's or higher degree grads, so 85,000 in total. Last year, the cap was met in one day, and 124,000 applications were received against the 85,000 slots. The last time that the cap was reached in one day was back in 2009. In 2009, 165,000 applications were received against the 85,000 spots. Now, what happened between 2009 and 2013? Well, the economy tanked. Now the economy is slowly improving, and actually in the IT sector, the conventional thinking is that the unemployment rate is less than 4%. So there really is a demand for highly skilled, especially IT professionals. If this issue is not addressed, and it's not going to be addressed on its own, it's going to have to be part of a comprehensive package. If that is not addressed this year, the next quota opens up on April 1st. The quota is going to be met in one day, but we are assuming that 165,000 plus applications are going to be received against this quota. So a lot of people are going to be turned away, and a lot of businesses are going to be affected because they're not going to be able to employ the people that they would like to employ in order to be competitive in our global market. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to talk about his wonderful H-1B experience.
So my experience, I take it back a step. I'm a lawyer by training. I spent 7 years in a big law firm in New York City, a big law firm here in Chicago. I then lost my mind and started a tech startup with a friend of mine from college. So in that capacity, sorry about it. So I found myself running a small tech startup here in Chicago. We had somewhat limited resources. Neither my partner nor I had a technical background. So we went through all sorts of growing pains on that front. But we were fortunate enough to raise some money, build a technical team. We had headhunters and so forth. And as we're kind of learning a million different things, this H-1B issue came up, which I knew very little about. Fortunately, I was referred to Nancy by another colleague of mine. So at least from my perspective, I'm certainly not a subject matter expert. Like many other people you'll hear from today, is our goal when we went through this process was nothing else than to find the best possible person we could who happened to need an H-1B status. The reason for that, and I think the reason for the technology companies in particular, is because it's a business. It's much more of a zero-sum game than other businesses were years ago. If you think about bookstores, for example, and that is, you don't need a bookstore in every town because Amazon does it better and more efficiently. And that is similar to what these technology companies are competing against, because they can sell their products anywhere. So there's fewer winners and more losers. What that means is they need to hire the best possible people there are, and I think that's how we got involved. And it was a shockingly difficult process, made easier because we had Nancy, but it clearly needs more help because we do not have the resources. Like Bill Gates, that's fantastic that he was able to do that. Most technology companies, especially young ones, do not.
So just to give you an idea of what the Senate bill and the House bills would do if enacted in their current state. So many H-1B employers actually would prefer the House bill over the Senate bill with their H-1B provisions. The Senate added a lot of new hurdles in the H-1B program. It would increase the H-1B cap. There would be an escalator provision, which would increase the quota from 85,000 up to a minimum of 115,000, which could escalate up to 185,000. But the administrative burdens and also the cost of the program would become very unmanageable for a lot of employers. Whereas the House provision would increase the H-1B quota from 85,000 up to 155,000 with no escalator provision. But it would not increase the fees to the same degree, and it also wouldn't add all the different administrative burdens that are being proposed by the Senate bill. So many employers, especially in the consulting area, would prefer the House bill over the Senate bill. But besides the H-1B front, the other front that we want to talk about is the green cards based on employment. And this area is also a train wreck. Because if you're Indian, Chinese, or Filipino, the wait for a green card is just ridiculous. So the most extreme example, this is all based on supply and demand. And again, there's a fixed number that can be given out each year. And there's country limitations. So no country can receive more than 7% of the overall visas. And especially for Indian nationals, the demand greatly exceeds the supply. The assumption is for some Indian nationals in positions which require bachelor's degrees, if the system remains as it is right now, it will take 65 years for them to get through the process. 65 years. And you have to continue to be employed, okay? So much for retirement, you know. You start the process when you're 25, so you're going to be 90 by the time you get your green card. Just ridiculous. And this is why a lot of individuals who are adversely affected by these awful provisions in the current law are now seeking to go to other countries, and they are taking our technology with them. So we are going to be competing against these people in the future just because of our short-sightedness for not accommodating them and for keeping the best and the brightest in the U.S. Do you want to talk about your situation?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nan. I'm a trader. I work for a local trading company called Atlantic Trading on the Chicago Board of Trade Trading floor. Started working in 2007 and been with the company for 6.5 years. So my story goes like this. I started dealing with the U.S. immigration laws back in 2003 when I applied to school in the U.S. I got accepted by University of Chicago. University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I started applying for the student visa, which was F1 at the time, but I got denied 4 times. I got it for 5th time, but I didn't really know why. I didn't really get the reason from the officer in the U.S. Embassy. They just simply denied my application. I brought my documents 5th time to the embassy, and they just accepted. So after 4 years of college, I got accepted by Atlantic Trading. Out of 160 applicants, they chose. I was among the 2 that they chose for the offer. I was able to work for a year under OPT. I think it's standing for Optional Practical Training.
Yes.
After the F1 status, and that's 2007. So in 2008, I had to apply for H1B in order to keep working for Atlantic Trading. So Nancy was helping me going through the process, and that was one of the few years that got really good, large amount of applicants. It was 165,000. I was under the 65,000 quota, so it's roughly about 1/3 the chance of getting it. It was a lottery process, so I had no idea if I could get it or not. It just totally depended on luck. So that was a rough half a year. I had to wait. At the end, I was lucky. I got it in 2008 and started working as H1B status. After a while, I was applying. My company sponsored me for permanent resident, and Nancy started helping me with the green card application. I was pretty much approved right away. Then I had to wait for the quota, the cutoff dates to be my priority date. The biggest difficulty I had with the green card application process is I had to maintain my H1B status, but the H1B visa for Chinese is different. That the visa only valid for about half a year. So, but after the visa being expired, I was still able to work in the United States. But whenever I go out, I have to reapply for visa. So going to the U.S. Embassy, going through the whole process again, which usually takes about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So the biggest difficulty I had this year was in March. I had a family emergency. My grandmother passed away. I really want to go back for a short period, just for the funeral, but I couldn't because I couldn't return to the U.S. right away because my visa expired. I had to reapply, which takes more than 2 weeks. I really just want to go back for a weekend. So every year, my job definition is basically you take 2 to 3 weeks vacation a year. Usually, I plan like my vacation every year, 6 months ahead, 3 months ahead, because I need to reapply my visa every year. So at that time, I couldn't go back. that was kind of disappointing of the immigration law that didn't really help me for a short time period travel. I'm still waiting for my permanent residence right now. Don't really know when I can get it. So.
So Nan raised actually a couple really interesting points. In our country right now are more than 1 million F and J students. We are educating 1 million F and J students. There are 85,000 H-1Bs. So what's going to happen to the other 935,000, am I doing the math right? 915,000 international students. They are going to go abroad and take, again, our knowledge with them. So that is one concern. Now, as for the green card side of CIR, in this respect, I believe that the Senate bill is actually better than the House bill. The Senate bill contains many more provisions to create more numbers for individuals who are waiting in line like Nan right now. If the Senate bill was passed, it would exempt a lot of people from having to wait for their green cards, individuals who, again, have been determined to be the best and the brightest. The House bill, unfortunately, would not increase the number of green cards available, so it really would not take care of the situation at all. So really, from the employment perspective, a blending of both the House bill and the Senate bill would be in the best interests of American businesses. And hopefully the way that this progresses is we have the Senate bill, and as Shirley was saying, right now there are 5 bills which have been voted out of committee in the House. All you need is one bill to be passed by the House, and for both the senators and the representatives to agree to sit down together, and boy, that's going to be contentious in that conference committee, but if they agree to sit down together and work something out, then hopefully the best comes out for everybody involved. So.
Roy Burr, among local AILA members, needs no introduction. He's very visible. He has been a strong advocate for immigration causes for many, many years. Roy is a champion of the downtrodden, for lack of a better word. He goes every week to pray with detainees at Broadview and does many other things to help the most needy among immigrants. We're very pleased to have him on this panel, and I'm going to let Roy introduce his panelists because he's got a relationship, professional relationship with all of them, and I think he'll do a better job than I will.
Thank you, Nancy, very much. And we should give Nancy a round of applause for the terrific job she's doing. Thank you all. This the third and last panel today. We're going to talk about some due process issues, fundamental fairness, some things like mandatory custody, bars to judicial review. And then you're going to hear the powerful testimony of a woman who is the wife of one of my clients, whose husband was locked up in a series of immigration jails for 11 months, and the great suffering that she and her family went through. I'd like to share another quick story if I can. And it's a call I got yesterday from a woman. Her husband's name is Ahmad. He's 51 years of age. She's a U.S. citizen. Together they have 6 U.S. citizen children. Several years ago, Ahmad was arrested by immigration. Even though he had a green card since 1991, they found out that a number of years before, when he was running his store near Cabrini Greens, he had a gun, and it was not a licensed weapon. So his lawyer told him, simply plead guilty, you'll get probation, there'll be no problems. Exactly the wrong advice from an immigration standpoint. After immigration got a hold of him, it was mandatory custody, and it ended up being mandatory deportation. He's now in Jordan. The wife is on welfare. She's trying to raise the 6 kids on her own. Her petition for him to come back, his visa was denied because he had a felony conviction. That's the type of thing that's happening. Right now, our country has in custody at any one time, immigration custody, about 35,000 people. Many of them are subject to this provision called mandatory custody. And it was part of a law that was enacted in 1996, a law called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, Clearly the most anti-immigrant law ever enacted in the history of our country. Among the other provisions in that law, RIA, are bars to judicial review. So many people that had their rights denied in court or didn't get a fair hearing can't get that reviewed by a federal judge. Mandatory custody, as I said. A great expansion of the grounds of deportability, including the grounds of criminal grounds. We have something in the Immigration Act called aggravated felony. The 96 Act expanded that so much that it even includes some things that are misdemeanors under state law. Provisions such as what is a conviction, what people can be deported for, was also expanded. Something that used to be called supervision, or is called supervision in Illinois, and people are told this is not going to be a conviction under Illinois law, is a conviction for immigration purposes. So what the bottom line of what happened in 96 is it became much easier to deport people, much harder to obtain status, and very, very difficult and often impossible to obtain a fair judicial review of a decision of an administrative law judge or an immigration agency. So today we're going to talk about not only the bad news, we're going to talk about some good news as well. We have today with us Ruth Lopez from ICER, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. They've been on the front line of trying to get better laws passed here in Illinois. One of their great victories was the driver's license bill, and I see we have the reporter here from the Tribune that wrote a terrific article about it. It's in your materials today. But I'd like, and Ruth is going to talk about not only why that happened, but why we've not had some of the bad laws passed here in Illinois that we've seen in some of the other states, like in Arizona and Alabama. So I'd like to introduce Ruth Lopez, who is with ICER. Give her a round of applause, please.
Everyone, thank you so much for having me here today. If you're not familiar with the coalition began in 1986, right after the IRCA passed, the Immigration Reform and Control Act. The mission of our organization is that we're dedicated to promoting the rights of immigrants and refugees to full and equal protection in civic, social, and political life in our diverse society. And we live that every single day. Our work is so dedicated to exactly that. Over the past 12 years, the organization has really pioneered work here in Illinois and as well as nationally. We're part of a national organization called FIRM, the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, that has really spearheaded a lot of the work at this national level, even during this current CIR push. It was the reason that ICER is where it is today is really 12 years ago we really looked to our executive director at the time, Joshua Hoyt, really looked to see how we could continue to expand and move beyond just where we were at this moment, but what was coming in the future and how we could expand and create immigrant power within the state of Illinois, and again, nationally. That led to moving, and we've seen it now, we knew communities weren't going to stay, immigrant communities weren't going to stay in Illinois, but they would be moving out to different collar counties and, really settling and making roots outside of the city. Right now, we have organizations so we're a member organization. We have over 130 members as part of our coalition, and we have organizations that started in like the west suburbs and out in Aurora and new areas of the city, the outside of Chicago, that we really hadn't had immigrant populations in the past. So the coalition has really helped support and create a lot of those organizations. We also have, over the years, engaged in a lot of nonpartisan voter registration, voter turnout through a New Americans Democracy Project, and that was really about harnessing that immigrant power, that immigrant community, and saying, though there are a lot of undocumented, our families are part of this, our families can vote, this issue is important to us, and listen. And I think that really has gotten us to where we are today. The fight for driver's licenses is not something that just happened. It didn't just pass this past year. It's been years in the making, years and years and years in the making, and the political power that the immigrant community has harnessed through this voter registration, through this voter turnout. The politicians knew they couldn't stop it, and they can't deny it. And fortunately, Governor Quinn passed it in January of last year, and it just started the first driver's license appointments happened on December 2nd, and we're starting to see people, the undocumented community, having that right here in Illinois. So one of the questions Roy had posed to me is why, and I'll talk more about how driver's licenses help, but why have we seen things like driver's licenses pass in Illinois? And why don't we have all of these bad laws coming in? Well, it's because of exactly that. It's because of the immigrant power that we've created, and it's immigrants understanding that through citizenship, through becoming naturalized, through being a part of their community, engaging and organizing. You heard Maria, she's amazing. Immigrants like her to come out and speak with others who may not be able or who don't understand the process, don't vote, but now can do it for people like their friends, and just all of that immigrant power, that voting bloc that we have, that know that if you're not right with this issue, then you're not going to get our vote, and we'll find somebody who is, no matter what side of the fence you sit on politically. And that's why in Illinois we don't have those laws. They know that they can't come in and bully our immigrants in this country, in this state, because everyone's got their backs, right? And that's something that we're very proud of at the coalition, and will continue to do until the end. So I think, Roy, that's why we don't have the bad laws here, and that's why we continue to fight to make sure that the laws across the country emulate that. And to speak of how we can better the community and better Illinois, our members will be voting next week on what our state platform is moving into 2014, and a lot of the state platform, the proposals are things such as, passing something sort of like the Trust Act. How can Illinois be engaged in passing a Trust Act? How do we, so national and state, right? What does administrative relief look like? What is stopping deportations? Our communities are being, continue the 1,100 deportations a day. We have to stop this. How can we in Illinois be effective? And we're the home of the president. How can we here ensure that we're leading on deportations and administrative relief on stopping that? Healthcare for, what can we do about healthcare? What can we do about so many things that could improve our immigrant community? So I'll be on the lookout. We'll find out what our platform is after next week, and we're going to start getting to work right away. Specifically around the driver's licenses, again, I know all of you are very well versed in all of this, but how does that help? It's one of the questions you had posed to me, Roy, was how do driver's licenses provide some relief? How do they stop our deportations? Well, not in Chicago, but other communities within the state are, the whole state's under secure communities, and we know that some of those, jurisdictions use those ICE holds and call ICE and get people in the system. So a deportable offense, I'm sure all of you have come in contact with it, is a traffic violation. How is that? What this driver's license does is gives people that security that that's not going to happen. That with this driver's license, they are sure that they can come home to their family, and they'll be home to support them and not be deported because of a mere traffic violation. So we've been doing workshops all across the state to inform people on what the process is with driver's licenses, how they can be in the system. The demand is there. People are ready. They're excited about it, and we know that there's more that we can do besides driver's license in the state of Illinois to make it a more immigrant friendly and accepting, welcoming community. So,
Thank you.
To quote Nelson Mandela, everything is impossible until it happens. And so with immigration reform, it may seem impossible. The experts may tell us that it can't happen. But with efforts like what you're doing, Ruth, and so many others, it's going to happen. So let's rededicate ourselves to make it so. Another quote from Nelson Mandela is, if you want to judge a society, don't look at how it treats its wealthy, look at its prisons. And in the immigration context, we have, as I said earlier, 35,000 people locked up at any one time. Many give up, sign away their rights, and that leads to the numbers that Ruth was talking about earlier. 400,000 deportations a year, 2 million since President Obama took office. You're next going to hear about this from a hero of mine and many in this room. Mary Meg McCarthy is Executive Director of the National Immigrant Justice Center. She's been honored many times for her work. She's a brilliant, compassionate advocate and an outspoken, zealous person on behalf of immigrants and immigrant rights. Please welcome Mary Meg McCarthy.
Thank you, Roy, very much. Roy is one of my heroes, and it's really nice to be here today. And I just have to follow up with what Ruth said, which I think has really been amazing in the past year, is how the coalition, working locally, regionally, nationally, has really been a force in engaging new partners in immigration reform. She talked about the religious leaders locking themselves outside of standing outside, waiting to get in outside of the locked doors of Roscom's office. But, they've organized the corporate community, the immigrant rights community. I mean, having that diverse partnership, I think, has gotten us to this point and will get us over to the next step. So kudos to ICIR for this wonderful work. As Roy said, I work at the National Immigrant Justice Center, where we advocate for the human rights of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And we do that through direct service. We provide legal counsel to about 10,000 individuals a year, low income. And we also engage in advocacy, both legislative and administrative. We have a colleague in Washington, D.C., and we engage in litigation with Roy and other partners here in the room. To really push, both whether it's through the courts or through the governmental agencies or through legislation reform that we see from our clients is so critical. Roy's asked me to talk about due process in the immigration detention system, and if there's any system that needs reform, it's this detention system. As Roy mentioned, there's a lot of issues, from the detention bed mandate to just the number of people who've been deported and what that means to our detention system. So I want to talk about focuses on 3 areas. First area is access to legal counsel. Second area is going to be about the mandatory detention that Roy also referred to. And then the third area is going to be about the detention bed mandate. And then I want to talk a little bit about the legislation, which I know you've heard about today already, so I don't want to be redundant, but just where things are in terms of these due process issues. I have to say, at NIJC, the people we represent are the ones who really inform what I'm going to talk to you about today. We represent unaccompanied immigrant children, we represent victims of human trafficking, asylum seekers fleeing persecution, long-term residents in the U.S. who may never secure legal status because they're waiting in those long lines. We represent lawful permanent residents. We represent youth. And we represent a lot of detained individuals. In all those categories, we represent individuals who are also fleeing persecution or seeking legal status because of their relationship with their partner, and they may be sexual minorities. In those 3 areas, let me talk about access to counsel. Most individuals who are in removal proceedings do not have lawyers, don't even know what their legal rights are. And this is even worse when you're talking about the detained population. Statistics show that only 16% of the detained individuals have access to counsel. And as Roy said, there's 35,000 individuals in detention today. Asylum seekers, only 3% of detained asylum seekers with no legal aid prevail in their cases, compared to 18% who have legal counsel. For non-detained asylum seekers, it's even more staggering. 13% of non-detained asylum seekers prevail in their cases without representation, compared to 74% who prevail with attorneys. So you can see what impact it has when an individual has an attorney. Imagine you're a child, or you see one of your children comes to the United States, doesn't speak the language, and is facing deportation proceedings. How is a child going to navigate the immigration system? Impossible. Individuals who are mentally ill. We've seen cases where individuals who don't have capacity to be able to represent themselves alone in court. The lack of access to counsel is one of the fundamental due process violations that we see in this country. Let me go to the second point, mandatory detention. As Roy said, in 1996, the law expanded who's subject to what we call mandatory detention. So it expanded those individuals who are included in what's called expedited removal. They're going to be expeditiously removed. They're subject to mandatory detention. Who does that include? Asylum seekers, individuals fleeing persecution in their home country, seeking protection here in the United States. That 1996 law also expanded who would be subject to mandatory detention because they committed an aggravated felony. Well, when you look at some of the crimes that constitute aggravated felony, as Roy said, they're misdemeanors under our state law. We had a case of an individual, a refugee from the former Soviet Union, who stole 4 packs, of cigarettes from Walgreens. He was subject to mandatory detention with no access to counsel. With counsel, he prevailed. Without counsel, he would never have understood how to navigate that system. So we have individuals who are impacted by mandatory detention. We have the expedited removal individuals, the individuals with crimes. Those could be lawful permanent residents, such as our refugee case. He did have a legal status. Some of the people have a lawful permanent resident status for years, but they've committed a crime that puts them into this mandatory detention system. And then the third group would be individuals who go through what we call summary proceedings. And many of those individuals are in reinstatement proceedings. Now, any non-immigration lawyers in here? Anybody guess who's not an immigration lawyer what reinstatement means? All right. Reinstatement means you had a prior removal order, right? So those 2 million people that Roy was talking about, some of those people are coming back to be with their families, or coming back because they're fleeing persecution in their home country. They came to the United States because they were being persecuted because of who they are, what they were involved with, what they did, what their political beliefs, their religious beliefs, their sexual orientation, whatever. They can't remain in their home country. So even though they've been deported, maybe by that expedited removal process, because they never had a lawyer, they never had a hearing, and they're coming back. And guess what? Those individuals will never see a lawyer. They will be removed automatically, and they are subject to mandatory detention. We have seen so many of these cases, and I'm sure other immigration lawyers here in this room have seen the increase in the number of people who are subject to this reinstatement, and they're subject to mandatory detention, and they don't have access to counsel. And they're here to be with their families, their loved ones, or seeking protection. So, and right now, 70% of the individuals who are being deported are individuals who go through these summary removal proceedings. They never see an attorney and they never see a judge. That's mind-boggling when you think about that. That's how our system is working now. The third area I wanted to talk about briefly is this detention bed mandate, which is just, it's ludicrous. there is a provision within appropriations legislation that says there must be 34,000 beds a day for immigrants, to detain immigrants. Now, it is read by Congress that 34,000 beds a day must be filled. I would argue you could interpret that differently. But right now, that's how everyone's interpreting that. You have to fill 34,000 beds. We have to pay for 34,000 beds. There is no other agency, law enforcement agency, in the country where there is a mandate to fill the beds. That's historically left to the law enforcement agency to exercise its discretion. Do we need to fill all these beds? But that's not how immigration's handled. So, even though you have someone who may not be subject to mandatory detention, who has family, who's not a flight risk, not a danger to the community, they're thrown into a county jail. Because, gotta fill those beds. It's a bed quota. And guess what? It costs us a lot of money to fill those beds. In the criminal justice system, the criminal justice system recognizes you don't have to detain someone physically. You can use a halfway house, alternatives to detention, orders of supervision, probation. But we don't have that in the immigration system. It's not available. Should it be? Yes. And I think that's one of the changes that we have to advocate for. There's no reason to be locking up all these people and really denying them access to counsel when you think of how far away many of these jails are. We have one in Illinois, it's about 5 hours away. It's on the border of Kentucky, Tri-County. So the system is broken, and due process and human rights are being violated daily. We've seen that when we see cases of individuals who've been detained and have been victims of prison rapes, who have committed suicide because they did not receive the proper mental health treatment, who have been denied access to basic medical care, who have been denied a right to see an attorney when they had legal relief and they were deported. So there's a lot that can be done, and I'm happy to say, and you probably heard about this earlier, the Senate bill does have some really good provisions. For example, it says unaccompanied immigrant children in this country who are in immigration proceedings should have access to counsel. We're making some headway there. It also provides for improving the immigration court system, providing legal orientation programs to all immigrants who are detained, and it expands the Board of Immigration Appeals, and it also provides some additional protections in the asylum process, eliminating the one-year rule specifically. But that passed out of the Senate. That was great, but now, as you've heard, we're kind of stuck in the House. But unfortunately, the House Judiciary Committee passed in June. Again, this is a committee. This isn't the House of the whole House. What's called the SAFE Act, the Strengthen and Fortify Enforcement Act. Well, you can just imagine from the title, it's about enforcement. It essentially overturns the Arizona Supreme Court decision, which says we shouldn't have local enforcement or local officials enforcing immigration law. It expands so many of the enforcement operations that are so harmful, that feed into this detention system, that feed into the deportation system, that feeds into people being separated from their families or facing some type of harm in their home country. So hopefully this doesn't pass or move forward. Two other major things. It does a lot, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, and I'm happy to answer questions, but it eliminates any funding for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it criminalizes undocumented status. Well, the lawyer side of me says, well, great that they all get public defenders and they have a lawyer. But that's not what we want. Immigrants aren't criminals. They're here to be with their family. They're here to work. So this legislation has a lot of problems, and ICIR and other organizations have been really fighting hard to oppose that and just to not see that move forward. And I think what we need to hold on to is that marker bill, is the Senate bill, and hopefully quash any further movement or in pulling any of these provisions in the SAFE Act, which is really the unsafe act, moving forward, because it really does erode what is so precious about our democracy, is upholding and safeguarding fundamental due process and human rights. So I will end there and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Mayor Beck talked about a prison in Ullen. It's called Tri-County, Illinois. It's a little over 5 hours to the south of us. Our next speaker is one of the bravest women I know. Her husband was locked up in Ullen, as well as in Jefferson County and finally in McHenry County for a total of 11 months. She's going to tell the story of how she, her husband, and her son suffered during that period. Please welcome America Kiter.
My name is America Calleros, and my husband was detained for 11 months under the mandatory detention. 3 years ago, he was stopped for a traffic violation, and he was not released. They told us that he had a nice an immigration hold on him, and we didn't understand why. It turned out that he had, because of a probation that he had 8 years ago, he was subject to mandatory detention. Our son was 5 years old at the time, and my husband was his primary caregiver. Shortly after my husband was taken away, my son started to rip his nails off, and they would bleed. And I knew that things were just not going to be okay. My husband was sent to Ullen, 6 hours away, and it made it very difficult to take my son or even for myself to go see him. After my husband was there for about 3 weeks, he started to develop a very bad skin infection, and he was not getting treatment. And it was very frustrating to know that he was there and he needed help, and there was nothing that I could do to help him. And I couldn't help my son either because I didn't understand how to help him. He would ask me why his father couldn't come home. He would ask me if his father was a bad person, and I would tell him he's not. And he would say, "Mommy, I know he's not a bad person. He takes me to the park. He plays with me. Why can't he come home?" And I just didn't know what to do to help him, to comfort him. It took an enormous strain on us psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and even financially, because for him to be able to call us, I had to pay for some service so that my cell phone could receive phone calls from the jail. And he could only call, we could only afford for him to call for maybe 30 minutes in a week. And I had to send money to him so that he could eat, because the food they provided was just not enough. Anything that he would try to save for later, an orange, an apple or something, they would force them to throw it away. So I had to send money so that he could purchase more food. He didn't get medical attention for his infection until 3 months later. And by then he was moved to McHenry County, which is 2 hours away. When he was closer, I started to take my son to see him every week. We were only allowed to see him for 30 minutes a week through a monitor. And it made it very, very difficult to explain to my son why he couldn't touch his father, why he couldn't hug him, why he couldn't hold his hand. The morning would always start out, we would go Saturday mornings, and I would tell him, I would try to make it a positive thing. We're gonna go see Daddy today, you're gonna see Daddy, and his question would always be, am I gonna be able to hug him? Am I gonna be able to hold his hand? Am I gonna be able to kiss him? And I would say, well, no, you won't be able to do that. And that would set the tone for the entire drive there and the visit, because you would sit in this little cubicle through this monitor, and while I'm talking to my husband through the phone, my son would sit at my feet just ripping at his nails. And it's just, it just seems so unfair because my husband is not a bad person. He's not a violent person. He's not. He's a really good dad and a really good husband, and I just felt that it was so unfair what was happening to us and the toll it was taking on all of us. After a point, my husband said stop bringing him because it's just going to make it worse for him. He won't understand. So I started taking him to therapy, and he's still now going to therapy, actually, 3 years later. And I want to say 10 months into it, I really started to feel the breakdown of it, the emotional stress because I wasn't sleeping. I wanted to give up, not only on the case itself, but on everything. I wanted to suppress my feelings and my emotions, and I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to take care of myself. And if it wasn't for Mr. Bird and his support, I think I would have taken a very, very different path than we did. And thankfully he's home now, and I appreciate Mr. Berg so much for that. But it just took a financial and emotional and psychological toll on us that I don't think it'll ever go away. And I don't think my son will ever forget that, because as he's still going through therapy now, it still comes up. He's still afraid. He has this fear that his father will be taken away. He has that very present in his thoughts and his mind. Even though he may not vocalize it, it comes up. It comes up in his conversations, and he wonders, well, what's going to happen, because it's not over. My husband is out because he was afforded bond, but it's not over. There are. I feel for my son. I worry for him because he is such a good kid, and I know this has affected him greatly because it wasn't up until maybe 3 weeks ago that I was finally able to cut his nails. He finally let them grow, and so I guess it's a step in the right direction for him that he's getting better. Thank you.
Thank you, America, for sharing that story. The suffering of people in custody is horrific, and what happens to the families is horrific. Mary Mag mentioned suicides. We had one out in McHenry County not too long ago, a woman by the name of Hasiba Belbachir, an asylum seeker from Algeria, who was found hung in her cell. There have been over 100 deaths of immigrant detainees. But the suffering also impacts the families, the children, the wives, the spouses that are on the outside. So these are some things that we see as practitioners, these due process violations, these horrific, inhumane practices that are happening as a result of this 96 law.
So I just want to take a moment again to thank all of our panelists, Roy, Bob, Shirley, our clients, our partners in immigration work, and all of you for coming out today. We are looking forward to seeing coverage in the media and hopefully getting the message out that immigration reform is not about helping illegal activity, but about bringing this country to a sensible place that's going to help the economy, that's going to bring people who can benefit our country out of the shadows and get us to a better place where all people can share in the good that's going to come from allowing people to be who they are and take control of their lives and be a benefit to all.